And we're back with Senator David Coltart of Zimbabwe. David, just very quickly, you started to say that there were other fears. Was Mugabe afraid, was Mbeki afraid that success in Zimbabwe of an opposition party might lead to success here against him?
We can't prove this, but our assumption was that Mbeki saw Zuma in Morgan Tsvangirai.
Yeah.
And saw Cosatu in the MDC. I think his greatest fear was that a trade union-backed party would gather sufficient support to overwhelm a liberation party.
There were definite similarities. But isn't the key to the future of Zimbabwe, much like South Africa, from the time of apartheid, even when the banks withdrew their loans, aren't loans the big issue? Because when Mugabe ran out of money, President Mbeki gave him a bailout. I think it was 300 million rand at the time. Isn't that an important component of how Mugabe was able to continue?
Oh, there's no doubt that money was extended. But actually, his main means of being able to continue prior to the inclusive government was by printing money. He effectively stole the pensions and the savings of ordinary Zimbabweans, and that was a much greater source of support to him than any foreign loans.
Yes. Okay. Now you get into the government when there's the global political agreement, which was negotiated much later by President Mbeki, and from an opposition senator who's had many battles with Mugabe and his people, you become his Minister of Education. Tell me about your first day as minister.
Well, first of all, I had a very checkered history with Mugabe.
Yes.
And he opposed me becoming a minister. He tried to persuade my colleagues not to have me. But my first day was spent in the ministry, which was in a total state of chaos. When I got to the headquarter buildings, the lifts weren't working, there wasn't any water in the building. And I saw a very clear indication of where the priorities lay. The transport officer came rushing into my office to say, "Mr. Coltart, your brand new Mercedes-Benz is waiting for you." Now, the day I took office, 90,000 teachers were on strike, over 8,000 schools were closed, and we were 2 months into the school term. And so this was their priority, getting a new Mercedes-Benz. It was quite a shocking discovery.
My understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, is that when you arrived at the building, you had to walk up without elevators. There was no stationery.
No stationery, no internet. There was no water in the building, so it was like walking through a sewage pond.
For a Minister of Education.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just talk a bit about education very quickly. We all think in South Africa that Zimbabwe has a better education system than us. I guess you'd agree with that. Where did it come from? And how is it now?
I think the roots of it are in the late 1940s and 1950s. Whereas South Africa was beleaguered by the Nationalist Party and its Bantu education policy, which was specifically designed to ensure that black South Africans could only be laborers. In contrast, there was a relatively liberal government in southern Rhodesia.
This is pre-Ian Smith, long before Ian Smith.
During the Federation days of the
1950s,
Sir Garfield Todd, and in particular his wife, Grace Todd, developed something called the Dadaya Scheme, which was this outstanding curriculum, which still to this day forms the basis of our curriculum.
And what role did Mugabe play when he came to power in 1980 in the education system?
Well, what Smith did prior to Mugabe is he didn't change the basis, the foundation. He just starved the education, black education, of funds.
Smith did.
But he kept the basic education system.
Yes.
So what Mugabe did on coming to power is he broke all these bottlenecks. He expanded education, but kept the curriculum, kept the system. And so the fundamental difference between South Africa and Zimbabwe is that we've got generations of people who understand the benefit of a good education system. And so people revere teachers, and teachers themselves in Zimbabwe are passionate about what they do.
And how's that holding up now? Because we're going to come and talk about the state of Zimbabwe now, which is in real trouble again. Is the education system holding up, or is it being fraying at the edges?
When I took over in 2009, it was near total collapse. We managed to stabilize. We got teachers back into the classroom. Sadly, since the end of the inclusive government in 2013, it started to be starved of funding again. Funding is being diverted, and we've got this very much centrist mentality of my successor,
yes.
Which annoys teachers, and sadly it's reverting. It's still a good education system, though.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about Robert Mugabe. You land up in the cabinet. He's tried to stop you getting into the cabinet, but you're now in the cabinet, and you're his Minister of Education. What was that like?
Well, our first few meetings were very tense. Just to go back a bit, my first interaction with Mugabe was way back in 1981, when I was a student activist at UCT and was threatened with deportation by the nationalist government. Mugabe heard about it and sent a telegram to me, which not then judge, but our lecturer, Dennis Davis, read out in class. And of course, it had this electrifying effect on campus. So when I came back to Zimbabwe in the early 1980s, Mugabe was one of my heroes. Over the next decade or so, I saw the genocide which took place in front of my eyes.
Right.
And of course, I lost all respect, and we got into a very troubled relationship.
Yes.
By the late 1990s, he described me as an enemy of the state. So when we finally met again, with me now a minister in his cabinet, you can imagine how tense it was. But funnily enough, and to give credit to Mugabe, because of his passion for education, although we disagreed on virtually every other topic, a mutual respect developed. He realized that I was actually trying to do the right thing in education, and I recognized that he would back me at every turn. And he saved my bacon on numerous occasions. And it was that combination of his support with Western support and others which enabled us to achieve the successes we did in those 4 years.
We have to take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about Robert Mugabe and then President Jacob Zuma's Zimbabwe policy.